Good day, everybody that's started to join. Welcome. I'm Albie Castleman from Golden Key International Honor Society. Whilst you are joining some of the house logistics, look at the bottom of the screen. There's a chat box and a question and answer box. In the chat box, please tell me who you are and from where you are. So we have approximately a quarter of the people that we expect to join. But in the meantime, let's introduce ourselves. As I said, I'm Albie Castleman from Golden Key International Honor Society, and I welcome all Golden Key members who attend this webinar this afternoon. Use your chat box. There we are. Denise from South Africa. Welcome, Denise. Good to have you on board. Some of the other participants that would like to share, here we have Jordan from Western Cape, Hesley from Potch, Anneke from the Free State. Welcome, it's great to have you on board. Danae Lotren from University of Pretoria, Kirsten from South Africa, Joburg, Letitia from Manila, Philippines. Welcome, Letitia, good to have you on board. We already have quite a good geographic representation. Ibrahim from Johannesburg, Sandisu from PE, Tersha from Northwest, Cassandra from Joburg, Deirdre from the UK. Welcome, Deirdre. Swetha from Joburg, Ayu from Maryland, USA. Welcome. Georgia from Georgina. I'm Georgina from South Africa. June from Cape Town, I assume that is. Welcome, everybody. Great to have you with us. Najesa from KZN, Montaku from Johannesburg. As I said, I'm Albie Castleman from Golden Key International Honor Society. And here we have Kavesh from Cape Town, Tubile from DUT KZN, Amanda from Joburg. And Alreen from Bloemfontein. We have approximately half of our registrations that joined us, so welcome everybody. We use the chat box at the bottom to just announce that we hear who you are and from where you are. Big Boy from Pretoria. Itebogo from Mafeking, Tamara from Benoni, that's good. Maloko from Johannesburg. Afternoon, everybody. Julie from Johannesburg. Tatiana from Potchefstroom, Nkosi from University of Johannesburg, Tuli Nkosi. Dureta from Johannesburg. So welcome everybody. I think we're going to start. I'm Albie Castleman from Golden Key International Honor Society. I'm the Regional Director for Southern Africa. And with me, we have the pleasure and the honor to have Janthan Naidu online. Janthan is an organizational psychologist from HFMTalentindex South Africa, and he will provide more detailed information into the uses and benefits of the HFMTalentindex tools, specifically the top 5 and Talent Scan, with a focus on how these tools can add value to your personal development and also the way forward. Janthan will also be sharing his development insights gathered from his experience working in talent and consulting fields for over 18 years. We're honored to have you online, Janthan. Thank you very much for spending time with Golden Key members. Thank you for knowing the value of our members. We do appreciate that. Golden Key International Honor Society and HFM entered into a collaboration to ensure that we can bring to members some valuable online benefits, and we will explore a bit more about that. We have now 43 attendees. Welcome everybody. So during the conversation, you can post your questions in the Q&A block, and we will deal with some of those live online, and some of those we will just respond in writing. So you are more than welcome, and I'm going to hand over to Janthren. Thank you, Janthren.
Thank you very much, Elmi. Good afternoon, everyone. It's always a pleasure to be involved with any of the Golden Key events. So thank you for the opportunity here once again. I am going to be stopping my video in the interest of connectivity. It is going to improve connectivity, but you should still be able to hear me. So as Elmi indicated, we will be going through the two reports that Golden Key have made available to its members, complimentary. And those are the top 5 competencies and the talent scan report. Okay. But first of all, I'd like to give you a little bit of background about both of these reports. So why is it important to actually look at the contents of the top 5 or the talent scan? This all becomes clear if we try and place it within context of how performance is realized from potential, and mostly in the workplace, but we can also utilize this thinking for how you're actually performing in an academic context as well. Okay. So if we think about a typical workplace environment, an individual is in the workplace because they are demonstrating a particular set of skills, behavior, knowledge, and experience. And in fact, that is why individuals are hired for that particular performance that is desired for a particular role. Now that performance and the extent to which an individual can demonstrate that performance depends on whether that individual has the necessary potential for those particular areas. From a psychological point of view, we can conceive of potential as coming from 2 broad areas, namely personality and cognitive ability. And so here, in this context, we're not talking about other types of potential. For example, we could be talking about physical potential as well, but rather we're talking about the psychological potential that is relevant in a workplace context. Cognitive ability is something that we're quite familiar with. The measurement of cognitive ability has been around for quite a long time, and we're all quite familiar with of potential from cognitive ability. And I think most of us will find that we talk about this almost on a daily basis. So in other words, we talk about how clever somebody is, to put it in very simple terms. What is their mental horsepower? Do they have the capacity to actually do the type of work that they are interested in? The other source of potential, which is not talked about as often, is personality. And this might sound a little bit confusing to people because personality is something that is innate to all of us, and it is unique. Gillian, can you still hear me, or is my connection still too weak?
Janthren, from my side, I think went off for about 5 to 6 seconds there.
Okay, so it's
Yes.
I'm back.
You're back
sorry
online.
about that.
Thanks, Janthren.
Okay, so I was saying that the other source of potential is personality. If you think about a particular role and the requirements for a particular role.
Meantime, we just give Janthren an opportunity to come back online. And just share your screen again, please, Janthren.
Okay, if you just give me a second.
Right. That's the great part of the times that we're in. We are all confronted with agility. We have to think on our feet. We have to accommodate the environment. We have dogs in the background. We have children in the background. And that's great. That gives us a real world experience of COVID-19 and how it impacts on the workplace. So Jonathan is back, and I'm going to hand back to him. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you, Omi. I think the only thing that I won't be able to compete with is if my neighbor decides to cut grass again today, like they were doing. But otherwise, yes, we can cope with the barking dogs, etc. Okay, so we were talking about performance, and that performance comes from potential, two broad sources of potential: cognitive ability and personality. So if we refer to personality as a source of potential, we are really answering the question, do you have the underlying traits and characteristics necessary for that particular position? Okay. All of us are born with some potential. It would be correct to say that somebody has no potential. It's just that we have different levels of potential and potential in different areas. But the extent to which that potential develops into the desirable skills, knowledge, experience, and behavior is dependent on a number of factors. And the internal factors or internal catalysts that we can identify are things like, does this lie within an area of interest? So if something is of interest to me, I'm going to put a bit more effort into it. Is it giving me an opportunity to express my preferred role in the team and in the workplace? If it is, then once again, likely I'm going to put in a bit more effort. And the third thing that we can consider is, am I getting what I want out of this particular role? In other words, is it aligned to my motivations? All of those things will impact on the extent to which your potential will develop into the desirable performance. More recently, we have recognized that there is some other quality that also impacts on performance. So it's something that differentiates some individuals from other individuals. And recent research has identified that quality or that construct as learning agility. So learning agility is also an innate quality, and it will also impact upon the level of performance that we are seeing. So in today's discussion, we are going to look at what is your potential for different areas from your personality. And in future discussions, we'll also look at what is your potential for superior performance because of your level of learning agility. And then we could also examine your interests, preferred roles, and motivations in the future me report, which is used for a slightly different purpose. Okay. So today's discussion will focus mostly around personality. So we've all come across some sort of personality assessment or the other, but if we can divide them broadly into two categories, we have what we call the trait-based assessments and then the type-based assessments. Let's start off with the type-based assessments. Those are assessments that will say to you that you belong in a particular category, and they will label that category by some or other name. So for example, let's say they were given names of colors. So if you belonged in the blue category, you are similar to other people in the blue category in particular ways. So that's why it's called the type-based assessment. Type-based assessments are great. Type-based assessments don't do is they don't tell you how you are unique and how you are different from other individuals. And that is the primary difference between type-based assessments and trait-based assessments. So the personality assessment that we utilize is a trait-based assessment. It is based upon a very well-known model of personality, namely the Big Five model. So models are used to describe different constructs by providing some sort of structure to describe that construct. The Big Five model has been around since about the 1980s. It's a well-researched, well-validated model, and that's one of the reasons that we use it. Another reason that we use the Big Five model is that it has been found to be the model that is most relevant for a business or workplace context. So other ways of describing and explaining personality are, for example, the 16-factor theory. We could even talk about Freudian type of theory, okay? But those are not that useful in a workplace context. The Big Five model says that we can describe personality in 5 broad factors. And those 5 broad factors are very commonly known as openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So those are the same 5 categories that we utilize in our assessment. We might not call them by those same names, but it's exactly the same broad factors. Within each of those broad factors, there are subscales. So at the end of the day, we are actually describing an individual across 30 individual subscales. So we are actually able to gather quite rich data about a particular individual. Because there are so many subscales, we do require an instrument that can actually gather valid information across all 30 subscales. And that is the reason that the personality assessment consists of 192 items. We can't just measure one of the subscales just once. We need to substantiate and validate the information that we get. So we do measure each of those subscales more than once. And that's the reason it ends up being a fairly lengthy assessment at 192 items. However, you will find that those 192 items do go by quite quickly. This is what we refer to as a self-report type of assessment. In other words, we are asking you to tell us about yourself. It's different from cognitive assessments where there are right or wrong answers. Here, we are relying on you being able to report quite accurately on your personality. And that's another reason that we measure each of those constructs so many times. Okay. So if you look at the right-hand side of that screen, we have what we call the iceberg model. What the iceberg model tells us is that if we consider an individual, the only aspects that we can directly observe is their behavior. However, that behavior is underpinned by a number of constructs that we can't actually directly observe. For example, motivators, interests, personality, and cognitive ability. However, they do have a major impact on the individual's behavior. So that is the reason that we focus on measuring personality. By getting a comprehensive view of somebody's personality, we are able to then predict what sort of behavior we are likely to see from this individual in the workplace. Once we have measured your personality and we have information on all 30 subscales, we can actually use those subscales to get an indication of how are you likely to perform or behave in a particular context. So you will know that once you know a person very well, you are able to almost predict their behavior in different situations. So similarly, by describing behavior across those 30 scales, we can then give you a description of how are you likely to behave in specific areas. So those specific areas are what we refer to as competencies. And a brief definition of a competency is that collection of knowledge, skills, and attributes that contribute towards success in a particular position. Here on this screen, we have 2 examples of competencies, namely persuasiveness and innovating. Okay. Now you'll see that there are 3 factors or 3 personality traits that contribute towards one's level of persuasiveness, namely dominance, cheerfulness, and imagination. And then another example is innovating. And once again, the three factors that contribute towards it are imagination, inclination towards change, and openness to experience. And all of those are coming from the personality assessment.
So, Jonathan, it's Almi. I do see we have a question that I think we need to answer now. And the question is, how will you implement this assessment, which is very lengthy in context, where employees do not see the value of personality assessments?
So that is the reason that we don't see the value of giving somebody the results of a personality assessment. But what we do is we interpret the personality results in a way that is meaningful for the business context. So for example, a manager might be interested in a salesperson because he wants someone that is persuasive, that is assertive, that can negotiate. So it's pointless giving him a personality report, but we'd rather take that personality report and interpret it for persuasiveness, assertiveness, and a negotiation. And those are the 3 competencies that might be important for that job. So we don't waste the manager's time looking at all of the other personality constructs or traits that are not relevant for that particular position. Okay? So the measurement of personality, Elmi, is something that is very, very widespread in the business context. It is used in selection, development, and talent management processes in a large number of organizations.
And Jonathan, do you find that there are a lot of resistance from employees to complete these assessments?
Generally, no. So I can tell you maybe about 22 years ago, when I first started doing this sort of work, the only resistance I encountered was with candidates who might have had poor experience of psychometrics previously. So, you know, with the legacy that we have in this country, there was a time when psychometrics was used to discriminate unfairly between people. And psychometrics was used as a way of actually labeling people. Okay, we've come a long, long way since those days. So now in South Africa, we cannot use a psychometric instrument that has not been demonstrated to be valid, reliable, and fair for a South African context. In other words, it must measure what it's saying it's measuring. We must get the same result with repeated assessment, and it must not discriminate unfairly amongst any South Africans.
Thank you, Jonathan. So I think what I hear is that the punitive perception is at the moment busy to decrease.
Actually, to be quite honest, I haven't come across that sort of scenario in an organization. In all of the organizations that we utilize psychometrics, they are used most widely for selection purposes to determine fit for a particular role. Okay? And when we're determining fit for a role, it's not just for the organization's benefit, it's also for the individual's benefit. So we mustn't just talk about finding the right person for the job. We must also think about finding the right job for the person. So that's why it's used most widely, but it's also used very widely for development. So once you are in your role, how do you actually optimize your performance in that role? You optimize your performance by acting on your strengths and trying to overcome possible areas of limitation. And that's the kind of insight that psychometrics can give you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I was talking about personality measurement, and the point of measuring your personality is to be able to give you an idea of where do your strengths lie in terms of the different workplace competencies. What you see on the screen now is our library of competencies. It's quite a comprehensive library. As you can see, there's a large number of competencies, 44 competencies in total. And we can describe just about any role in an organization by utilizing different combinations of these competencies. Okay, and we can go a step further by then giving an individual insight into what are his levels of potential for these different competency areas. So with the top 5 report that we have offered to students, we are rather giving an indication of where do your top areas of potential lie. We're not comparing you to any position in particular, but rather we are saying of these 44 competencies, which are the 5 that you have top potential for? You have potential for all of them to different extents, but which are the 5 that you have the most potential for? And these 5 areas will represent your areas of likely strength, which you are, which you would do well to actually leverage off. So what is the benefit of doing this for you as an individual? Firstly, and most obviously, to identify your natural strengths. Now, for many of you, this is not going to come as a big surprise. most of us have a level of self-awareness where we can actually identify where we are comfortable and what our strengths actually are. But we may not have that language or vocabulary to actually describe it in detail. So that's what this report is doing. It's also bringing it to a different level of consciousness where you can now actually act upon those strengths. Okay? And then secondly, you can also then ensure that you have aligned your choices to your preferred environment, and your strengths are also aligned to your choice of preferred environment. So those are the benefits for you as a member and the user of the report. Okay. Other applications, and maybe we might even think about this as the more typical application. So organizations would typically use this type of assessment to compare an individual to a particular role and to get a sense of how well that individual fits that particular role. Okay. And the second broad way in which organizations tend to use this type of information is to determine natural talent and then compare it to demonstrated performance. In other words, in order to facilitate an individual's development and enhancement of performance within a particular role. Okay. So enough about the background. Yes.
Jansen, I think we have a question that we just want to quickly address. What would your recommendations be with regards to using the test with treating individuals with acute mental illness? As often mental illness impacts on our behavior and the test may not truly reflect their personality. That's a tricky one.
Yeah, so if we think about psychology, in South Africa, there are three broad areas of practice of psychology. The one area of practice is the one that I'm involved in, namely organizational psychology. Organizational psychology deals with the so-called normal person within a work context and aims to optimize performance within that workplace context. Then you are probably familiar with counseling psychologists. Counseling psychologists deal with individuals, so-called normal individuals, that are just having problems with day-to-day adjustment to life. And counseling psychologists help with bringing an individual back to a so-called normal level of functioning. Then we have clinical psychologists that deal with psychopathology. In other words, the so-called abnormal. Okay? And they try to bring those individuals to some level of functioning. These assessments that we are talking about are specifically designed for an organizational type of setting. So it's specifically designed to be used with individuals that are not demonstrating any psychopathology. So the results actually are probably not going to be valid if somebody with some sort of psychopathology actually takes the assessment, because the assessments are not built to actually overcome the barriers that might be involved with psychopathology. There are specific assessments that are designed and constructed to be used with individuals that are displaying some sort of psychopathology to either diagnose or to treat those type of pathologies.
Thank you. Just another one. I have a question here on validity. If Brett is asking, I have had the experience where the feedback of the assessment was a complete opposite of my personality. It was like a stranger was described. The company psychometrist would not discuss further. Are such results a regular occurrence with such tests?
I almost want to say never. I've never come across that situation. So our particular personality assessment has been rigorously researched so that it is valid and reliable in a South African context. We report results by comparing an individual to the typical South African. The only time when somebody might feel that it is not describing them well is if that person does not have that well-developed self-awareness. So therefore, they don't spend as much time reflecting on their own behavior, their own performance, and so on. So when it is reported in a so-called objective fashion, it might not sound familiar to them.
Thank you, Jonathan.
It's also possible, for whatever reason, human beings are strange creatures. Sometimes we do come across individuals that try to manipulate the assessment. Okay? And very often in a business context, the manipulation is in the positive direction. In other words, trying to look better than they actually are. The reason for that is that assessments are often used in a selection context. So it makes sense that people want to do well and they will try and manipulate the assessment in that manner. However, most assessments will have a built-in indicator so that you understand the extent to which the individual has tried to project a better image. Okay. And in those cases, the results may not reflect the person 100% accurately. Okay. So what you're seeing on the screen now is an example of 3 competencies that were identified for somebody as being 3 of their top 5 competencies. And you will see a description of the likely behavior of this individual for those 3 competency areas. Now, these descriptions that you will see in the top 5 report are not generic descriptions. So if you had to compare your sensitivity description to somebody else's, it's not necessarily going to look the same. The reason is that the competency sensitivity is likely dependent on 4 to 5 individual personality scales. And the description is derived from how that person scored on those individual scales. And there are 9 points of performance on those scales. So therefore, the description can look very different from one person to another. So most often, individuals will have the response, this is very accurate, it describes me quite accurately. Okay. I'm actually going to quickly switch to an actual report. Okay. And Elmi, you must please tell me if you can still see my screen. And I'm now actually sharing the report.
Yes, Jonathan, we do. Thank you.
So if you've requested a top 5 report, now the competency top 5 report was made available complimentary to Golden Key members up until very recently, because the organization wanted to give some value to its members. We did receive some feedback from some members that felt that this report was too brief, wasn't giving them enough information, etc. So subsequently, we have substituted this report with another report, which I will share with you in a little while. However, I do realize that there will be some amongst you that already have downloaded your top 5 report. So I just want to quickly go through it so you understand what information is contained here and where it comes from, and also how to use it. Okay. So here you'll see your name appearing on the cover and the date on which you downloaded the report. The introductory paragraphs explains where we actually get the top 5 information from. And as I'd explained, it comes from the personality assessment. Okay. So that's the same in everyone's report. And then on the next page, you have the 5 competencies which you are showing the highest potential for, with a description that is quite tailored for you as an individual. Now, I imagine that you can use this, for example, in preparation for an interview. So if ever you're in an interview and somebody asks you, what are your strengths, or what do you perceive as your strengths, this is going to give you a very good idea of that. And I also don't see any reason why you can't also include some of this information in, for example, a CV. So you could, for example, have a section in your CV labeled my top skills or something like that, and you could use this information there as well. And as I said earlier in the presentation, compare this set of competencies to your current choice of career and see if there's a fit. Okay? So in this example here, for me, these 5 competencies actually would work very well for a psychologist. Okay, so if this was a psychology student, I would say, I think you're probably very well aligned to your career choice. Okay. And because this is written in quite a positive way, you'll find that the descriptions don't say anything about this person cannot or this person does not, but rather it's talking about what you are likely to see the person doing. You probably also will be comfortable sharing this report with others if necessary. So that's the top 5 report. Elmi, is there anything that you want to add about the top 5 report before I move on to the next one?
No, I think it's applicable and clear. I just want to make you aware of another question, but you can first switch your screen to the presentation and then I'll ask the question. Okay, so we have a question from an anonymous attendee. It's also to do with content and context. What actions could be done for employees who come from a different cultural background or language barrier? Individuals are then considered at a disadvantage if in fact they could be a good fit for the job.
It's quite a broad question. So if I understand correctly, we are talking about an individual that comes from a cultural background that is very different from the workplace that they're interested in entering.
Yes, I think that's the one part of the question. And the other one, I think, is the context of the assessment. Is it adapted for South Africans who are very diverse?
Okay, so that question is a little bit easier to answer. So I'll start off with that question. So all of our assessments here in South Africa, the results are reported against a South African norm. By that we mean, we give you a result that tells you what do you look like compared to the typical South African. And by typical South African, we mean balanced in terms of age, gender, race, ethnicity, educational level, work level, etc. Okay, so the norm group that we've compared the individual against is very, very well balanced for all of those factors. So it includes diverse ethnic backgrounds, different languages, different ages, different qualification levels, etc. So that is how we established the validity and the fairness of the assessment. And the fact that it is registered with the HPCSA, or Health Professions Council, is testament to the fact that it is a valid and fair and reliable assessment for the South African context. In terms of the organization type of question, I think that is a challenge that almost all of us are going to face. If I give you a personal example, up until I joined HFM, I was always the only English-speaking person in all of my workplaces. Okay, so how do I fit into a culture that is very different from mine? The first thing that we must remember is that the organization has its own culture and business has its own culture. So we should be rather focusing on the organizational and business culture rather than individual cultures. And we do know that in South Africa today, there is quite an emphasis placed on inclusion and diversity. Okay? So inclusion and diversity means that workplaces must make every effort to ensure not just that we don't disadvantage anyone, but everyone has equal opportunity. So somebody that needs preferential treatment gets preferential treatment. So let's say, for example, it's an individual that comes from a background where English is not the first language. Okay, so best case scenario, when you enter the workplace, if that workplace has an inclusion and diversity type of program, that workplace should make an effort to either upskill the individual or upskill everybody else so that everyone can communicate effectively.
Thank you. I think that answered the question. Thank you, Jan.
And another way of looking at it is that, if you have information like this, you're getting a sense of where your strengths lie. And your strengths are independent of your individual cultural background, because it is comparing you against a typical South African, not a specific cultural background. Okay, then the next report. Now, this is the report that we are going to make available going forward. It's called the Talent Scan report. Talent Scan is also based on the personality assessment. For those of you that have done the top 5 previously, if you were interested in now looking at your talent scan report, that is something that we can make available for you. But going forward, anyone that goes into the web shop, you will find access to the talent scan report. And as I said, it's based on the personality assessment as well. The talent scan is designed to give an individual insight into their strengths in 8 generic workplace skill areas. And so these workplace skill areas were found to be relevant across different sectors, different types of industries and so on. And that's the reason that we've included them. And for those 8 workplace skills, you will have your top talents and also some developmental guidelines as well. Okay, so I'm once again going to quickly switch to the actual report so I can actually show it to you. Okay. So the talent scan report is substantially longer than the top 5. It's 14 pages in total. Once again, you're going to get some introductory paragraphs and information explaining to you what this report is all about and how to use this report. Here we see the 8 generic skills that we are going to comment on. Okay? And if you look at these skills, for me, I think that they can also very easily be applied to an academic context as well. Okay? Especially things like cooperation, problem solving, quality awareness, project-based working. So now you're also getting an indication of what are my strengths in these areas that are applicable right now and not just for when I enter the workplace. Here's the 8 skills with the definitions of the 8 skills. The skills are a bit broader than competencies, and a particular skill might encompass more than one competency. On this page, we have a summary of what are your top talents with regard to each of those skills. So in this example, if you consider the skill of cooperation, what's standing out about this person is that they are likely to be quite a valuable contributor and also likely to be very cooperative. Okay? So those are the things that come easiest to this person in terms of cooperation. Other talents that are associated with this skill are listed on the far right-hand side. Okay? But of all of these talents, these 2 are the ones that are standing out about this individual, and therefore these are the strengths for this particular individual. So there's similar information for all 8 workplace skill areas that we are looking at in this particular report. Then as we go through the report, you have further information. So here you see a legend to the symbols that we are utilizing in the report. Okay. Then you receive detailed information per work skill. Okay, so in alphabetical order. Okay, so in terms of cooperation, this person's top talents were contributor and cooperative. Okay, so here we see what makes it this person's greatest talent. So here's a description of their top talent. Okay, and then in the next row, the exclamation mark is giving an indication of what are the things that you should actually watch out for. In other words, what could possibly go wrong for you in the workplace because of your unique personality profile. And what should you actually do to try and overcome those things that could possibly go wrong? So that's defined as your possible challenges. Okay, so these are the things that might not be coming that easily to you, but if you work on them, it's going to overcome these possible risk areas. And how do you overcome them? How do you achieve or overcome these challenges? Here in the last row are some tips that you can implement to actually overcome those challenges. And you can see that they are all very behavioral in nature. They are things that you can actually immediately implement. Okay, so similar information for all 8 workplace skills. Building client relations. Remember, clients are not just people that are paying you for a product or a service. It could also be an internal client. So if, for example, you're a tutor, your client is going to be the student. If you eventually work in an IT support, your client are all of the other employees of that organization. So similar layout here. Okay, so what are your strengths, the things that you should watch out for, possible risks, and how you should overcome them, and tips in actually achieving that. Okay. So 8 workplace skills. So therefore, a lot of information. Does it mean that you need to utilize all of these? Not necessarily. Okay, there might be some areas that you are relatively stronger on than others. I would leave it up to the individual to decide which 1 or 2 areas do I think I want to try and work on and strengthen. Try and keep it simple to start off with, because you don't want to overwhelm yourself. Even if you focus on just 1 area, I think that is sufficient. And here's also a bit of a development structure and plan to assist you in that. Okay, so the challenges were already identified for you. You just need to decide which challenge you want to work on. Okay, and here is where you might populate it with the tips that you received. So choose one of the tips that you received, and this is where you need to do some work. In this column called "This is what I'll need," so you need to decide, how am I actually going to achieve this action that I identified to overcome the challenge. So we've given you only 3 because, like I said, we don't want to overwhelm you, and it's better to focus on 1 or 2 areas to start off with, rather than trying to look at everything at the same time. Okay. So that is the talent scan report. Elmi, are there possibly any questions with regard to talent?
Not at the moment, Jonathan, but I'm sure people will populate questions as we go on. We're done through the report now.
Yes, so that is the complete report. That was the last page of it.
Right, great.
So I think
there are no questions.
I think students can also use this report similarly to the way they use the top 5. Those workplace skills also represent their strengths in terms of the top talents that were identified for them. Okay, so this column where it says your talents, those are the things that are standing out about you as an individual with respect to those 8 different workplace skill areas.
We do have a question now, Jonathan. Why is it split into male and female if you choose an option on the shop, the Golden Key shop, when you want to do your assessment?
In terms of the actual assessment, we don't have a requirement to know someone's gender. It could be in an attempt to gather biographical information to refine the tools. But in terms of the actual assessment, there is no difference.
Thank you. And then Dr. Nagesa just said, thank you very much for an informative session.
Thank you, Doctor.
It seems to me that we have answered most of the questions, Jonathan.
Okay, and maybe just to share some contact information, if anybody does have any outstanding comments, questions, or anything else, welcome to make contact with us.
Okay, we have one last question from Brett. Will the talent scan report be sufficient to motivate migration into a new area of a business? For instance, moving from a client facing to technical?
But I don't think so. So there are other reports that are designed specifically for something like that. What we would need to do is identify your possible strengths and possible limitations for that particular area. So we would need to first define that area and then give you a report that is comparing you to the requirements of that particular area. The talent scan is intended to give you insight into your generic strengths and limitations for generic workplace skills.
So I do think it's valuable for us to say to our Golden Key members, there are support. Once you've done your assessment and you got your report, We have support in the form of industrial psychologists or accredited facilitators that can debrief you on the report you've done. All you need to do is you need to send us an email, and we will make sure that we get you in contact with somebody that can actually guide you through the report. Thank you. There are no more questions at this stage, Janthan. Right, in that case, I think we can then end this webinar. I want to thank Janthan very much for the time and the very clear explanation. It's clear that people do understand the feedback and the presentation, Janthan, for which we are very valuable information. Thank you very much. How do I access the test? We will give you the exact link of how you can access it. Somebody will answer you, anonymous. Right, and that's it. So thank you very much, Janthan. Thank you for your valuable time. We appreciate that. People do say thank you very much. It's very insightful. We have a number of compliments.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Elmi. As I said, always lovely to be involved in a Golden Key event.
Thank you. Let me just see. No, Brett is also happy. Everybody, yeah, many people say thank you. Very insightful. Thank you for all the information. It's excellent. Thank you very much. So well done, Janthan. Another excellent